Welcome back to Ruins on a Hill Media, where neglected and forgotten truths are unearthed. And so today we're going to be tackling the huge, bottomless topic of stress management. So today's video is Conquering Stress by Learning to Surf, and I'm going to be using the metaphor of surfing as a way to do a little bit of teaching on this topic. And so, so we're obviously not going to be able to cover everything. As you know, stress is it's blamed for a lot of things, and rightly so. Unmitigated stress contributes to a lot of physical ailments and everything, and just mental and emotional burnout, and obviously contributes to relationship conflicts and everything else, right? And so, like I said, we're going to be looking at surfing, all right? And one of the things I like to do at work, I work with kids as a therapist for kids at a behavioral school. And I have a couple of those buckets of perler beads. It's Perler. You can get them at Walmart and other hobby stores. And sometimes I'll make a little surfboard-shaped thing out of perler beads, and I'll give it to a kid, and I'll talk to them about how to surf, how to ride the wave of stress, and they'll keep it in their pocket, and it's just a little bit of a reminder. I've also done that with my video on the heart shield. I'll make a little shield for them, and they can keep a little shield in their pocket, and it reminds them to use the skill. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today, the skill of surfing, obviously in a figurative sense, and a mental, emotional, spiritual sense. And so I want to start off by acknowledging just how important this is, and I'm sure most people agree. On the other hand, a lot of people get kind of burned out on the topic of stress management because they feel like they've tried all these things and nothing works, etc. But of course, things do work, and we just have to find kind of our own recipe, of things that help us. I mean, it can be a lot of things, okay? And we're going to talk about the surfboard and what it can represent in your life, okay? I want to say up front that in using this metaphor, that when dealing with stress management, please do not have the idea that in any way that I am promoting in any way the idea that you can somehow learn to skate through life unscathed. I think in today's world, we almost have this expectation, this unrealistic expectation to be able to live a perfectly comfortable, painless life. Whether we want to call that entitlement or whatever you want to call that. But when you hear people complain about the littlest things, and it's really, it sounds like they really expect to not have to deal with any problems or any pain or difficulty or stress, then that is certainly unrealistic. And so my point is that even when you're surfing successfully, even when you're surfing skillfully, you're still going to get wet. All right. And that's how it is with life. So one of the first things you might need to do is confront yourself on what could be some very, very unrealistic expectations that you might have about life. And it could be that you have expectations for a number of different reasons. But for example, maybe, you might be someone who's pretty wealthy, and with that wealth comes the expectation that you should be able to insulate yourself from the pains and struggles of life. And that's just not realistic. Rich people have problems too, and relationship problems as well, in addition to just the tragedies of life and the things that happen outside of a person's control. So when you're surfing, just know you're still gonna get wet. My point is, you got to learn how to surf so you don't drown. You don't fall into the drink, as we say, and you don't sink to the bottom and have to deal with even much more massive problems as a result of not knowing how to surf properly. The good news is that, and surfers know that if they just stay on their surfboard every wave comes to an end and you can step off of the surfboard safely onto shore. And that's the goal here, is learning how to surf is so that you learn how to not react unnecessarily, and you learn how to not react excessively to stresses in your life, because the goal is to just ride it out. Now that doesn't mean that every wave is the same, every wave of stress or every problem that represents the wave, or I'm sorry, say that backwards, every wave that represents certain problems in your life, that those things don't require you to take some action or don't require you to make plans and take steps or be pretty darn proactive. But on the other hand, how many times do we overreact to the wave, to the problem, to the stress, to the issue? And by overreacting, we end up falling off the surfboard, so to speak, and we end up flailing and struggling and just trying to keep our head above water when we could have stayed on our surfboard and just ridden it out safely and gotten to shore safely. And so you may need to spend a lot of time on the surfboard. I think most people do. They're either dealing with a wave right now, they're surfing right now one way or another, either successfully or unsuccessfully, or they see a wave coming, it's just a few feet away and it's getting ready to hit, or they're just now stepping off of a wave that they've been dealing with for a while. And you can be in one of those three stages at all times at the same time. So you're stepping off of one problem, you're dealing with one actively right now, and you see another one coming. The point is, we have to handle waves properly no matter how often they come. Sometimes we get fed up and we kind of justify overreacting to certain waves because daggone it, I deserve to be able to overreact. I've been dealing with this long enough, and people are just gonna have to deal with me now because I'm gonna blow up or whatever. Yet that's how we fall off, or it's one of the ways in which we fall into the water and then create more stress for ourselves and more problems. And so, I want to use another metaphor along with this, and so it's what I call the picture in my head. The picture in my head is a metaphor that talks about how in every situation, we have a picture in our head of how we think things should be. Basically, our expectations, our specific expectations for that situation. The picture in my head for how I think things should be when I get to work today, or when I go to this family gathering, or whatever. I have some time off and I have expectations for how my day should go. I had a couple days off last week, and about halfway through the second day, the van died. So the picture in my head was that the seas would be calm, and I wouldn't even need to surf. I'd just be on the shore, just relaxing and enjoying time off and spending time with my wife and whatnot. But the van died, and the radiator blew up and everything else. So I had to surf, and I can't say that I surfed as successfully as I wish I should, that I wish I did. So this is a learning process, and we all have to be patient with ourselves. Sometimes we just simply don't think to use this skill, or honestly, we're in a funk and we just don't even want to. We just want to stay mad or whatever. You know what? You're human. I'm human. Sometimes that's where we're at. But what we try to do is we try to use the skill as many times as possible to deal with as many waves as possible in as healthy and godly a manner as possible. And that's what the surfing skill is all about. And so my audience, if you haven't figured out by now, yes, my audience for this video, I'm speaking to fellow Christian believers, but I also want to encourage you, if you're not a Christian believer, to watch this video anyway, because I really do think you'll get something out of it. You may have gotten a little bit out of it already, So hang in there and just don't get too hung up on that. Take what you can use. And so the picture in my head is a way we have to first understand we all have unspoken / invisible expectations, for every single situation. We just don't realize. Sometimes more than others we do realize what our expectations are. We may even say them out loud or tell people. But my point is that the stress that you experience is often directly proportionate to how rigid that picture in your head is for any given situation. Because basically, the more rigid the picture in your head, and the less that reality matches up in detail by detail with the picture in your head, the more frustrated and stressed you're going to feel. And yes, I'm looking for something in my little book here. There it is. Okay. So what I want to do is give you a definition of stress, and this is my definition, something I came up with. And I think you'll like it. I think you'll agree that it captures a lot of it, a lot of where stress comes from. Thinking about the picture in your head type thing, okay? All right, so the experience of stress is defined by the tension between a person's values, real needs, felt needs, desires, beliefs, and expectations, and those aspects of reality that do not match up with these values, real needs, felt needs, desires, beliefs, and expectations. And so this tension creates and results in emotional distress, obviously. We have other words for that. Worry, anxiety, stressing out, feeling down, getting depressed, feeling frustrated, irritated, angry, and then all the physical symptoms that we experience along with stress. And so again, understanding that if this is the picture in my head, but reality doesn't match up enough with the details of that picture, then the size of my stress is going to be determined by the size of the discrepancy, the magnitude of the discrepancy between the picture in my head and reality. So you're going to a family gathering and you're expecting to have a good time, and you get there and lo and behold, somebody is there who you hate and you don't like and you thought was not going to be there. The picture in your head has been shattered, and now because of the size of the discrepancy, you're paralyzed with these negative emotions, or you're just overwhelmed with stress about the situation. I worked with a lady some years ago who went through this, and she was talking to me about Christmas gathering and just not looking forward to it. The picture in her head was already negative because she was anticipating having to deal with some difficult family members there. And so she was pretty stressed about it. She was going to go and everything. I just remember kind of talking with her and was like, well, thank you for sharing the details of that picture. Sorry, I'm looking at one of the dogs out there. Hold on. Those goofy dogs. So I just asked her, I said, what would who else is going to be there? So she talked about, other family members and, the kids, cousins, grandkids, all this. And I just asked her to consider the possibility that maybe if she tried to focus only on the people that she felt like she had good relationships with, and especially the kids, because she enjoyed kids, that might help reduce the impact of the negative parts of the picture in her head, and certainly the negative parts of reality with these people. And so she said she'd give it a try. And so, of course, when I saw her again, I asked her, and she's like, hey, she's just said it was wonderful because she was able to focus on the kids and have fun with the kids, and then the adults that were there that she could talk to. And so she was able to change the picture in her head, or I should say she was able to be flexible with it, and she was able to tweak it and not just stay, stuck in the fact that these certain people were there and that was going to determine her mood. And so it was just a beautiful example of how she was able to do her own stress management by changing the picture in her head and also just changing her focus. And so a lot of times when we think about the metaphor of the surfer and the waves coming up, I want to show you a little poster that I drew. This is going to actually guide us a little bit here. And so you can see basically the big wave in the middle, and it's kind of got the surf breaking at the top there. At the very top, I drew a surfboard, and it just says the word skills underneath it. You see the little waves, and then, of course, the big wave that built up right there. You can see this arrow kind of pointing from the top down, hitting the shore, and I just wrote the word splat. It's a great word, isn't it? Here's just the beach, and then you got the ocean floor, okay? And then you've got these arrows showing the direction of, I just wrote the word weather, the weather, wind blowing in this direction. And the weather, of course, represents, just things that are blowing against us. It could be just different problems, other people's behaviors and attitudes, just difficult life circumstances. These things blow and contribute to the development of these large waves. So there's two things that contribute to the development of these big waves of stress that we have to deal with in our lives. And so it's these things, just life circumstances, people, difficult situations, challenges, problems, just issues of life. But the ocean floor also contributes to the development of big waves. And so the ocean floor represents, I'm trying to see what I wrote here, emotional wounds, past experiences, and unmet needs. And so the ocean floor is really kind of represents the subconscious, the things that have shaped our life from childhood that are now underwater. In other words, we're not always aware of these factors that still shape our mood and still shape our worldview and our perceptions and everything. So our childhood experiences, some of them being emotional wounds that we've experienced, unmet needs that are ongoing. Those can be certainly emotional, relational needs. So we know from geography or geology that the steepness, the kind of the sudden rise of the ocean floor is what creates big waves. And so the ocean floor being steep and jagged and kind of like an underwater cliff almost represents, again, the fact that we may have some pretty significant unresolved issues from our past. And because they're unresolved and they haven't been dealt with, when life is blowing against us, when people and problems and situations are blowing against us, because our past is undealt with and unresolved, and we haven't had healing for certain things from our past, it just makes it that much easier for big waves of stress to develop in reaction to the winds of life, okay? And so I ask people all the time, I'll probably pull this back up here again, but I ask people all the time, okay, where does the surfer ride on the wave? And so I would say that a good 80-85% of people, both kids, teenagers, and adults that I've used this metaphor with, I'd say a solid 80-85% tell me that the surfer rides on top of the wave, up here on top. Okay, and it's interesting, why do people say that? Okay, and you may know differently intellectually if you've ever seen somebody surfing on TV. They don't ride up there. They don't ride on top. But I think intuitively people feel like that's where you should ride because it just makes sense emotionally to feel like you're on top of that thing, that you are in control, that you're exerting dominance over the problem, the stress, the situation, whatever it is that's got you feeling stressed or upset or angry or whatever. It just kind of makes sense emotionally, I guess, to think, okay, I got to be on top of this thing. Nobody wants to feel vulnerable if they can help it, right? So being on top of the wave, I think that's where people intuitively want to be or feel they should be. The problem is, it's the top of the wave that crashes. It's the top of the wave that if you're up there when it crashes over, you're going to get hurt. You might even break your neck or drown. And so that's why I wrote Splat. And so let's reconsider the way we should surf, because that is not the way to surf. It's not the way to surf. The way to surf is to ride in the tube. Down here, down in the tube. The wave is actually over you. And I wrote there, you still get wet. So we talked about that already. But that's a very vulnerable feeling to be in the tube because the wave is over you, over top of you, as you're riding on that surfboard through that tunnel, this tunnel of water. You got thousands of tons of water all around you. It just doesn't feel safe, but that is where we need to be. And so, being on top of the wave, I wrote the scripture verse, Proverbs 14:12, and I'm probably going to use this verse in a lot of my videos, actually. I don't know if I've done it yet. But it says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Another way of saying that is, there are a lot of things that feel right to me, like it feels right to me to be on top of that wave and be in control and be large and in charge. That's what feels right to me. But really and truly, it leads to more pain and conflict and ultimately self-destruction in many situations. If we think about riding in the tube down below, where we feel much more vulnerable, that is truly much more the place of faith and putting our trust in the Lord. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. That's really, truly the path of letting God be God. And, when we're on top of the wave, we feel like we're God. All right? And so, I want to jump down, kind of look at my notes here. Well, let me just share this thought too, that when we try to control the wave or be on top of it, we try to squish it down, right? We try to make... The reason for trying to be in control is because we want to make things, turn out the way we want. And certainly this can lead to trying to control other people through all kinds of verbal and behavioral manipulation. We all do it. Everything we say is actually ultimately manipulating somebody, or we're trying to manipulate or influence others. This video is actually meant to manipulate you and to influence you in a good way. So that's a whole other topic. But we have to understand just how our failure to manage our stress it plays a big part in keeping us stuck, obviously. But stuck in these negative feedback loops. And so a negative feedback loop is where negative energy creates negative energy in another person, and then they react negatively to your negativity, and then you react negatively to their negativity, And so the negative feedback loop can become very self-perpetuating. The lady that I mentioned, she made some choices to break out of that negative feedback loop. She could have gotten sucked into some negative interactions with certain adults at the family Christmas party, but she chose not to. So obviously we have to be aware of the negative feedback loops in order to break out of them and make some different choices. Personally, I don't think there's any such thing as a neutral feedback loop or a neutral place. We're either in a positive or a negative. If I'm buying a pack of gum at the store and I hand it to the cashier and they say hi and I say hi and they ring me up and that's all that is said, that's a slightly positive feedback loop. It doesn't feel hugely positive, or it could be a slightly negative feedback loop because maybe I was disappointed that they weren't friendlier, or that they didn't compliment my hairdo. So, but I don't think there's any such thing as a neutral. We're either in a positive loop or a negative loop, even if it's mild. And so, so learning to surf is a way to change your attitude in order to break out of negative feedback loops so that you're not just getting sucked into them automatically, and so that you are not just feeding into the negative feedback loops that you're being invited to be a part of. And so people invite us through all kinds of different means and ways, and just unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, through tone of voice and look, body language, and the things that people are saying and doing. We're constantly being invited into other people's negative feedback loops. And I think we blindly get sucked into them all the time. So surfing is a skill that has to do with buying time to help yourself not react automatically in negative ways, in ways that are actually toxic or self-destructive or harmful. And so I want to just share with you briefly that, I'm going to think about that for a minute, because there's a lot, okay, and I don't know if I have time. So let's think about, I want to share a book title with you real quick, because when we have a picture in our head, it's because we want things to be a certain way, and a lot of times we don't want things to change. We don't want things to change at all. And then guess what? Things change. When my van broke down, that was a big change to my plans. The title of the book is Who Moved My Cheese? It's been around for years. It's an international bestseller. It's been read by people all around the world. The author is Spencer Johnson, and I believe he co-authored a book with Ken Blanchard, I believe, called The 1 Minute Manager, also another huge international bestseller for years and years. Who Moved My Cheese? Just a great metaphor. I encourage you to read it. It's an easy read. It'll really take you deeper into this topic. And so, cross out some of my little cheat sheet notes here. And so, let's dive into the details of the surfer metaphor a little bit more. And I'm going to use my little book here. I wrote these down a few years ago. So learning to surf. So we want to understand again what riding on top of the wave represents. Riding on top of the wave represents times when we are acting in pride, just self-will, my way or the highway. We're basically playing God when we're riding on top of the wave. And, we've kind of kicked God off of his throne, at least for this situation, because I want to be up there. I want to be in control. Riding on top of the wave, and this is a close cousin to what I just said, but it represents times when we are clinging to a false sense of personal power, control, and maybe even invincibility, or we feel like we have the right to exercise control over certain people, certain situations, certain decisions that are being made. This happens a lot in the parent-child relationship. We feel like we own our kids, and we mishandle our personal power in many ways. Sometimes just through trying to force the child to act a certain way. And I just did a video last night having to do with the key to successful parenting. I would highly encourage you to watch that. And so that touches on this idea in that video as well. So playing God and thinking that we own other people. I mean, we can feel that way towards others as well. We can have coworkers that we think we should have control over them, and so you know what I'm saying. Being on top of the wave represents the felt need to try to eliminate, avoid, and or squash down all pain, all stress, all discomfort, just all problems and inconveniences, and I mentioned this earlier. All right, so being on top of the wave represents that attitude. It also can represent, and this is a little bit of a different twist, it can also represent times when some people have learned through different maybe things growing up in their family. We all have a certain role that we take on in our families growing up. Some people have become such the caregiver in their family, or the responsible one, the one that's taking care of everybody else's messes or other people's responsibilities. So being on top of the wave can also represent just inappropriate, just taking on too much responsibility for other people's stuff, other people's issues, other people's problems, the things that other people should be taking care of in their own lives. That also is what riding on top of the wave can represent. Riding on top of the wave can represent being in denial about how your own beliefs, thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors contribute to your own stress and contribute to your own problems. And this is typical when it comes to addictions of all kinds. People just are in denial for however long about their struggle. And so they're trying to do life by being on top of the wave, which can represent I'm going to do my addiction whether you like it or not, and so they end up crashing. So that can certainly be a part of this metaphor. Being on top of the wave can also represent times when we just live life as like we are an island unto ourselves, just living life alone in the sense of doing life according to our own rules, our own sense of perceived self-sufficiency, believing and acting on the lie that I should do it all by myself, and certainly do it my way in all situations. And of course, being on top of the wave can represent just all the times in which we don't listen. We just don't take any feedback. It ties into that pride issue, that self-sufficiency issue, or that denial issue. But we're just up there in charge, large and in charge, and we're not teachable. We're not. Nobody can get through to us because we feel like in order to take that feedback that we don't want to hear from someone, we're afraid that that's going to knock us out of that position of control, and that we're going to automatically drown, which isn't true. In fact, getting on the surfboard often means we need to take advice. To ride the surfboard successfully, we have to learn to be teachable. I mean, I guess there's no other way to really say it. All right. So those are just some of the things that being on top of the wave represents. All right. The wave. Talk a little bit more about the wave. The wave can represent, like I said, all kinds of different stresses that come up in our life, things that are sometimes tied to unresolved past issues. So, for example, one of the things that that I, as an adult, I came to recognize as being a potentially big trigger for my stress was times when I felt ignored. And so this actually played out. I told myself a little bit last night in my parenting video, that I became a yeller, even as a therapist and knowing better, but I became a yeller. Well, one of the triggers for that were times when I felt ignored. Well, you know how it is if you feel ignored by your kid who, quote unquote, you should be able to control and that they should listen to you. And of course, yeah, they should. But my point is that came from my childhood. And so just real briefly, I had a good relationship with my dad, but there were times when I felt ignored by him. And he wasn't mean or nasty about it. There were just times where I wanted his attention or whatever. As a child, I probably blew this up more in my mind than what was really going on. But he would maybe be reading the newspaper or watching TV, and there was just some times where I felt ignored, and it became enough of an emotional hurt for me that it was still a bit of a sore spot for me as an adult, and even with other adults, not just with my own kids, but with other adults as well. And I've had to learn to recognize when the wave of hurt or anger at someone or being stressed about something going on in my relationship with this other person was because of the shape of my ocean floor, which is my childhood issues. And that particular childhood issue, having been unresolved for many years, meant that according to the wind blowing, which again, somebody else's behavior is what the wind represents, if I was feeling ignored by somebody who I felt really should not be ignoring me, then my stress wave would get pretty big, and then I could react in any number of ways out of that stress. And so I had to learn to surf, and I still have to surf anytime that I feel ignored, because even though I've experienced some healing for that old emotional hurt, it still can be triggered, and it's still something I have to actively take a deep breath and get on my surfboard and ride it out and not react. And so the wave represents all that. The wave represents cravings, urges, just these internal impulses, emotional, these are the things that come out of our emotional gut and sometimes take us by surprise. They can be positive or negative, but obviously we're talking more about the negative ones. A craving, somebody could have a craving for a cigarette, and if they can't get a cigarette, then their stress wave starts to get bigger and bigger. And if they try to control it and ride on top, that's where they might overreact to the stress of not being able to get a cigarette. But if they get on their surfboard, then they find ways to address the craving without reacting negatively against it. That's something we all have to learn to do. Is we can have a negative impulse, a negative feeling come up from the murky depths of our soul, of our mind. But we have one of two choices. We can either react to it, which usually ends in something yucky, or we can learn to surf and ride it out and deal with it in a healthy way. All right. So also the wave can represent just any powerful negative emotion. And remember, anger is a powerful negative emotion a lot of times, but not always negative, but often negative. But it's always a secondary emotion almost always. We can experience righteous anger because somebody hurt us, somebody sinned against us, and it was wrong, and then we have righteous anger. Okay, but underneath that anger, are other feelings like hurt or fear. So anger is a secondary emotion most of the time, and it's almost always there because of another emotion, another unresolved negative emotion: fear, hurt, pain, loneliness, jealousy. I mean, you name it. Okay. So the wave can be any of those emotions. And it can be that the wave is getting bigger because of some unresolved issue from our ocean floor, or just the wind blowing, and we're dealing with issues and people and problems that are just just triggering these negative emotions in us. All right. The wave can also represent felt needs, and that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about a craving for a cigarette or something like that. It's not a real need; it's a felt need. Okay, but we also have the felt need, like I said before, to be in control. That's not a real need most of the time. It's a felt need. It's something I feel that I need to have, and that's where Proverbs 14:12 comes into play. There's a way that seems right to a man, feels right, but ends in death and or conflict and suffering and struggle and all these things. Okay? The wave also represents, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. And then I already covered this one, the powerful urges, impulses, compulsions, and also with that, what I call survival habits, ways that we behave automatically that just, because of the way the wind is blowing that day, what rises up in us often are these automatic kind of emotional survival mechanisms, self-protective mechanisms that we don't even think about. And it can be as simple as somebody's getting ready to say something and we just snap at them. We shut them down. Well, that's kind of an ocean floor thing. And so the wave represents the stress of how I'm anticipating what I think this other person is getting ready to say to me, and I'm already stressed about it. And so then I'm reacting instead of surfing. I'm getting on top and trying to take control of that person and the words that they're saying. And think about this. Sometimes we think we can control or should be able to control other people's thoughts even, We think that we should have that kind of influence. And so we try to exert that kind of influence by mismanaging our stress wave. We fail to surf at all. And we just get fully into power and control mode, power and control struggles. The wave also represents just, again, powerful learned attitudes, perceptions, interpretations, and reactions. All that stuff. Most of it subconscious, most of it we're not aware of. Okay. And what else? So the wave can also represent the stress created by physical illness, physical things going on neurologically, biochemically. Obviously, those things can affect our mood and our stress level and our emotions. Okay. The wave can also represent things that are going on with our hormones at any given time of life. Just fluctuations pertaining to the hormones in our body, whether it's our thyroid or pituitary or whatever's going on. And of course, the wave can represent the emotions getting triggered. Again, this is an ocean floor issue if we've had abuse in our past. Just all the emotions that get triggered sometimes. And, it's almost like a shipwreck. The ship sinks to the bottom, and that represents, in this metaphor, that represents how we were sailing along just fine until we got hurt by somebody, physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever it is. So the ship sinks to the bottom, but then because of the wind and all the factors that are creating the big waves in our life, it's almost like some of the pieces of that shipwreck get churned up and some of that stuff comes to the surface. And when it comes to the surface, it creates this big wave of emotion. That is normal and natural, and that's going to happen for people who have not yet found healing for the abuse that they experienced. Okay? So the wave represents all the emotions that can get triggered from those shipwrecks. Okay? All right, now we're going to talk about surfing, specifically surfing. All right, so riding in the tube. And so riding in the tube represents some things, right? Represents a new attitude, obviously. One of the biggest things it represents is how I am now fostering an attitude in myself of accepting my limitations while also affirming God's absolute sovereignty over the world that he created and the universe that he created, including my life and the lives of other people. Riding in the tube represents me taking 100% responsibility for my behavior, my own attitudes, and the way I interpret things and the things that come out of my mouth and the ways in which I react out of survival mode and all the things that I've just shared with you that have to do with ways in which I'm contributing to the development of the wave, of the stress wave. So riding in the tube represents me taking 100% responsibility. And so if in a given situation, my behavior is really only 5% of the total problem, maybe the other 95% of the problem is other people or circumstances that are outside the control of any of us. Riding in the tube represents me taking 100% responsibility for my 5% of the problem, for my 5% contribution to the problem. Riding in the tube represents me participating with God and not fighting against God in regards to the ways in which he is trying to discipline me and shape me and reshape me, because God is trying to deal with my sin problem. God is trying to deal with my automatic, selfish, self-centered survival mode reactions to other people. God is trying to chip away and even burn away. If you read Psalm 66, 8 through 12, you'll find the metaphor of God being like a silversmith. What do silversmiths do? They take that silver ore that's got all kinds of other rock and other minerals and things that stuck to it and kind of intermingled with it. And God takes that and puts it in the kiln, in the fire that's hot enough to soften all those hard metals and minerals. And it's not so that God can destroy it. We're the silver. But all that other stuff represents the things that God attached to us in life that now have become part of us. And the things that we justify, the ways in which we react to other people, that we justify because, well, they did it to me. God is trying to melt that stuff off of you so that he can look at the silver and see his reflection. And so that is truly what it means to be made in God's image. He wants to see himself in us again. But he has to deal with our sin and our brokenness and all that crap that has gotten attached to us, sort of blindly, but also consciously, because we like being angry, or we like the powerful feeling of being on top of the wave. So we like the behaviors that help us to stay on top of the wave. Well, riding in the tube means that we are beginning to surrender those things to God so that he can burn them off of us through the conviction of his word and the conviction of his holiness. Like if we really compare ourselves to God, we're going to find out again really quickly that we don't measure up. Therefore, we need his help to become the people that he wants us to become and to reflect his character. Riding in the tube represents trusting God with outcomes as I obey him and do what is healthy and right in every situation in his eyes, as we do what's healthy and right in his eyes. Not what feels right, again, Proverbs 14:12, in my eyes. And so a lot of us struggle with outcomes. We want to control the outcomes. And we'll do everything we can to control the outcomes. And so that's when we splat. All right, riding in the tube represents letting go of that felt need to be in control. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a slogan just says, let go and let God. Another way of saying that is get on your surfboard and let God handle the outcomes. Riding in the tube represents acceptance of pain as a pathway to maturity and becoming more like Christ, becoming more that person of character that we need and want to become. But we have to accept that it takes going through pain. And like the scripture verses I just mentioned in Psalms, we have to allow ourselves to go through the fire. That's the thing. God sometimes puts us on the anvil or puts us in the fire and then puts us on the anvil. Yeah, sometimes God lets us go through things that we didn't choose, right? But there's also times where God is inviting us to let him put us through the fire. And, it takes faith and it takes trust, especially by the time we get to the anvil and we've already been through the fire for a while. And now he's ready to start pounding with that big hammer. And a lot of people struggle with faith because they think God's out to destroy them through the fires of life and the winds of life. And he's not. He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to shape you and reshape you. And he wants to see the gleam of that silver, So, but we often ride on top of the wave. We're pushing God away, saying, no, thank you. Forget that. That's not what I signed up for. So riding in the tube means, okay, God, you know what's best for me here, right? Riding in the tube represents embracing an attitude of patience towards other people because God has been patient towards you, and forgiving towards others because God has forgiven you through Jesus shedding his blood on the cross for you, even while you were still a sinner. Right? That's what riding in the tube represents. Riding in the tube represents practicing healthy interdependence with other people, leaning on other people in appropriate ways and in healthy ways, and not trying to be an island unto yourself. Riding in the tube represents letting go of my felt right to judge others and seek revenge. Riding in the tube represents, maintaining some healthy boundaries with other people. So, for example, the lady that went to the Christmas party, she riding in the tube in that situation could have represented that maybe she could have exchanged some words with some of the other adults that she was trying to avoid, but yet she would have maintained some healthy boundaries. So she could say hi to that uncle who always calls her names and puts her down. And maybe the uncle would say, hey, Merry Christmas. And she would say, Merry Christmas to you too. And then walk away. So riding in the tube means that even when we have to deal with difficult people, we still can have healthy boundaries and maintain healthy boundaries and treat others with basic respect, even when we don't always feel that they deserve it. Treat others with basic respect as a human being made in God's image, but not get sucked into a situation that would make the stress wave bigger or push us to want to get back on top of the wave. So we have to have healthy boundaries in order to avoid that. Riding in the tube represents an attitude of humility before God and even on a human level. before God because we're sinners. You know, we don't measure up. We don't. He loves us like crazy, but we can't come close to his holiness. And so humility, Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade for Christ, I believe, said that humility is the doorway to the development of all other godly character traits. You know, and so when we think about the fruit of the Spirit, you know, being gentle and kind and forgiving and all these things, it starts with humility. It can only start with humility, and it also starts with gratitude. When you have humility and gratitude, then you can serve. If you don't have humility and gratitude, you're probably gonna be on top of the wave. Okay, so riding in the tube also represents finding my fulfillment in life and my joy in life through my relationship with God and not through possessions or circumstances or, you know, who's on my friends list on Facebook. It's truly about, when I'm in the tube, I am focused primarily on my relationship with God as being the source of my self-esteem, being the source of my joy and my fulfillment in life. Okay. So that was a good list, right? So let's move on. The surfboard. What does the surfboard represent? The surfboard represents exercising faith in Christ, faith in God in that situation. And I say exercising because it's one thing to kind of have in the back of your mind, like, oh, I should be trusting God right now, but I'm just going to get on top of this wave. Sorry. Versus humbling yourself before God and say, God, I need you. And right now I feel like going off on this person, or right now I feel like doing this, this, and this in order to get control and get my wants met and get my needs met in the way that I want to. But instead, God, I am going to get on my surfboard and I'm going to ride this out. I'm going to trust you. Give me wisdom as far as, Lord, give me wisdom as far as things I do need to do. But remember, God will never ask you to do things that would cause you to jump off of the surfboard, because the surfboard represents standing on solid principles. Riding the surfboard represents standing on God's principles for healthy living. And God is never going to go against those principles. They come from Him. And so when God says, forgive your enemy, that's one of the ways in which you get on your surfboard and stay on your surfboard. Because if you don't forgive, you're going to fall off. And you're not going to just get a little bit wet. You're going to be struggling, right? You're going to be struggling for air, spiritually, emotionally, on every level. Riding on the surfboard represents practicing that healthy dependency on Christ as you trust Him to meet your true needs. So this goes back to the picture in your head. And let's be honest, a lot of times the picture that we have in our head, we've painted a picture in our mind of needs that are really just wants. All right? Riding on your surfboard represents trusting that God's going to meet your needs. And He may do it in His own time in a way that feels risky to you. Like it makes you want to get back on top of the wave because you feel like you need something right now. But God in His wisdom is letting you go through the fire because He's trying to shape you to trust Him. He's trying to shape you to lean on Him. If the need got met right now, especially if it got met through your own efforts, then you didn't grow and you did not develop deeper faith through that situation. You didn't develop a deeper love relationship with God because you did it yourself, and that's the end of the story. And, thanks God for keeping me alive, but I didn't really need you in that situation. Well, yeah, you did. Riding on the surfboard represents believing God's word specifically, despite your feelings, despite your doubts and your fears. One way to exercise belief and faith in God's word, even when your feelings don't match up, is to just read his word out loud and do it in a voice. This sounds weird, but do it in a voice that expresses confidence in God. Like you're not reading it timidly. You're reading his word out loud with authority. And times when I have done that, I need to do that more actually. But times when I have done that, within about 5 or 10 minutes, I actually feel differently. My mood has shifted. And it's because I just practiced healthy surfing, godly surfing, by really using his word and letting God's word activate faith in me when I didn't have it to start with. Right? So that's what can happen. That's why you should read it out loud confidently, even when you don't feel confident in it yet. But give it time. It shouldn't take real long. Like I said, a few times that I've really thought, oh, Greg, this is what you need to do. It's only taken 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. Riding on the surfboard represents speaking the truth to yourself about your sin and the truth about your condition at that moment. Sometimes it's kind of ugly. If we're honest with ourselves, we're not in a good place. But we have to be honest with ourselves first. But then it also represents speaking the truth in love. We all have to talk ourselves through situations, and I've done some other videos that really get into that more, especially the video on the heart shield. Speaking the truth in love to yourself and then also receiving honest feedback from others. So we've touched on that. Speaking the truth in love to yourself is one of the ways that you stay on your surfboard, because if you just beat yourself up and tear yourself down and kind of remind yourself, yep, you're a loser, then you fall off the surfboard. But when you speak the truth in love to yourself, you're being honest about your sin and about your condition. Yes, God, I messed up. And I sinned against you by fill in the blank. But God, thank you that you love me. Thank you that you went to the cross for me. And Lord Jesus, I cling to that right now. Thank you for your grace. I don't deserve it, but you gave it anyway. You came and died for me even as I was a sinner and still am a sinner. And I still rebel against you at times, Lord. But thank you for your grace. So that keeps you on your surfboard, because you're being honest about the mess up, but you're also speaking the truth of God's commitment to you, and he hasn't let you go. Riding on the surfboard represents any time that you grab a hold of any biblical principle for healthy living. Riding on the surfboard represents other things too, like eating right and exercising and getting enough sleep, all those things that help you to have stability. Riding on the surfboard represents making lifestyle changes that help you to reduce risk in your life and reduce the risk of unwanted consequences in your life. Riding on the surfboard represents just all the ways in which we engage in just good, healthy living, taking care of ourselves mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. Riding on the surfboard represents those times when we come to God first, instead of going our own way first. It represents getting on your surfboard first instead of trying to swim in a hurricane, instead of trying to ride on top of the wave in a hurricane. Coming to God first in every situation versus going the old self-reliance route first. Riding on the surfboard represents finding your life purpose. And Dr. James MacDonald does a radio program called Walk in the Word, and I believe my wife told me yesterday, November 2nd, that he did a program on finding your life purpose by simply understanding that your life purpose is revealed in God's Word. God spells out how we should act and the way we should treat others and all that. And so when people have these big question marks in their life about what's my life purpose, God's not going to tell you what color car to buy, but he is going to tell you how to treat the salesman who sold you the car. So riding on your surfboard represents, again, grabbing hold of the principles that are in God's Word for healthy living and godly living and the kind of living that will take you into eternity with him. It's all right there. There's probably other things, but those are the big ones that I've written down. And so this video is 1 hour and 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap up here soon. We've talked about what the ocean floor represents. I want to touch on a couple more real quick. The ocean floor represents basically your God-given core personality and temperament. The ocean floor represents your core motive. If you read Dr. Taylor Hartman's book, I think I've mentioned this in a couple other videos, called The People Code, he talks about core motive, which is something that drives your behavior from birth. And the four that he describes are intimacy, fun, peace, and power. And I'll let you read the book because we don't have time here. The ocean floor represents our sinfulness, the power of sin in our heart to drive our behavior in negative directions, right? The selfishness, the self-centeredness, the pettiness, the jealousy, all those things. The ocean floor represents how those things get triggered by the wind and the circumstances of life. But sometimes those things just rise up all on their own too, right? The ocean floor represents all the things that I've absorbed into my worldview and into my belief system that are erroneous, thinking errors that have become part of my belief system and the way that I think. So probably the biggest example we can think of one of the biggest is, racism. Racism is rooted in a false belief. And so the ocean floor represents all those false beliefs that have made their way onto our life map. I've also done another video using the metaphor of the treasure map, and I would invite you to listen to that one as well. The ocean floor represents all. I'm trying to go too fast. Represents the imprint of all of my life experiences, again, on my worldview, my belief system. How I perceive things, how I perceive myself, God, and others. The ocean floor represents, again, the impact of emotional wounds. I talked about the shipwreck of abuse and how those things have affected and shaped my core personality and ways in which those hurts and those wounds have knocked my personality sideways a little bit, or, the development of my personality. Maybe I'm not who I would have been if I hadn't been hurt by other people. The ocean floor represents, just all of our psychological defenses, all the ways in which we protect ourselves. It's sort of under the radar, we're not aware. Again, they're usually pretty self-centered things we say and do to protect ourselves, and we're just not aware. And the ocean floor represents all the ways in which broken trust become expressed through our reactions to situations where we either anticipate that our trust is going to be broken again, or situations where our trust is actively being broken again. All right, and the ocean floor represents all of the inner vows that I've made to myself over the years. And again, they're often very self-protective. I'm never going to let anyone get close to me again because so-and-so hurt me. That's an inner vow. And it's a promise I've made to myself that is now under the radar and under the water, under the surface. But when certain situations come along, those inner vows get triggered, and then the wave of stress rises up. Okay? So some truths about surfing real quick. And I mentioned this earlier, all waves must eventually come to shore. So that's the good news. You can ride every wave successfully on your surfboard, no matter how tall it is. You could ride 1,000-foot tall wave on a surfboard successfully, even though it's 1,000 feet tall. All right? Another truth about surfing, if you would give yourself permission to surf, you're going to save yourself a lot of stress in your life. You're going to save yourself from a lot of unnecessary pain and stress and struggle in your life. Another truth about surfing, it takes practice. Give yourself patience. Give yourself time to learn how to surf properly in all kinds of different situations of life. Another truth about surfing, we don't necessarily need to fear the wave. We just need to ride it out. And the last one I listed here is that every wave can be a learning experience. Every wave can be a learning experience. I guess that goes without saying, but I said it. Okay? All right, hold on a second. I'm going to be back in a minute. Okay, and so, by the way, in God's Word, God invites us to meditate on His Word. And I just want to say that Christian meditation is a very powerful way to get on your surfboard and stay on it. And especially if you read Psalm 119, it's all about relishing God's Word and savoring it and savoring the truths that God uses to breathe life into us, emotionally and spiritually. God's Word ultimately is a love letter to us as sinners, and broken sinners. And so Christian meditation is a powerful, powerful way to get on your surfboard and stay on it. I'm going to read through some descriptions here just to kind of add to the metaphor, and then we'll wrap up. Some rules for safe surfing. Okay, some rules for safe surfing. Preparation is key. Practice, practice, practice. Just like an athlete, you want to practice the skill until you get really good at it so that you don't have to think about it too much, So there have been situations in my life where I've been pleasantly surprised that I automatically surfed instead of automatically reacted negatively. Taking surfing lessons is important. So you're watching a video, you're taking a lesson about how to surf. Please read other authors and people about stress management and all this kind of good stuff. Hang out with experienced surfers. Hang out with people who are good at it. Hang out with people who are better at it than you are. Get a good surfboard and take care of it and stay on it. So again, the surfboard represents all the things that I listed earlier. Nurture those things, polish that thing up, make it the best surfboard possible, and then stay on it. Read good books, like I said, about surfing. I had a little typo there. If and when you fall off the surfboard, get back on, right? Get back on as soon as possible. Forgive yourself for falling off in the first place and get back on as soon as possible. Again, remember, you're going to get wet. Some situations are going to bother you and upset you, and even as you're surfing, you're going to just feel horrible and yucky, but stay on your surfboard and don't get fancy and don't try to do any tricks, but just ride it out. All right? Don't look backwards too much and don't look too far ahead. When you're surfing, you gotta be aware of where you're at on the wave And then when the surfboard comes to shore, then you can look around and enjoy the environment on a broader level, But when you're surfing, you got to stay focused. Let's see, what else? We have to accept the wave for what it is, especially if it rises up as a result of some things from our past and things from our childhood and stuff like that. Remember that we can't ride on someone else's surfboard with them, but we can invite people to surf with us because we just need that encouragement. We need that support. We can't surf for them, and we can't surf really on their surfboard either. We need to ride on our surfboard because we're responsible for ourselves. Okay? Don't be surprised by waves coming. Expect them. It's like what I would say to someone who's in recovery for an addiction. Don't wake up in the morning and then you see a beer commercial at 10:30 in the morning and you're surprised and suddenly you're thrown into I need a beer. When you wake up in the morning, remind yourself, I'm going to see a beer commercial probably sometime today. Same thing with this. We want to always remind ourselves, you know what? There's probably going to be a wave today of some kind. Don't be surprised. Be prepared. And that goes back to, don't function out of this false belief that life should be waveless. It's not realistic. Again, in every wave, find the tube. And so, the tube we talked about. Again, don't try any fancy tricks, right? Be honest with God and yourself and others about the nature of the wave that you're on. You might need to talk to a therapist because the wave you're on is very much about bits and pieces of some old shipwrecks rising back up to the surface, and you are now having to deal with the emotions of those pieces that are coming to the surface. Those pieces could be memories that are getting triggered for whatever reason, and now you're having to deal as an adult with things that maybe you had shoved to the side for a long time, just out of necessity, and now you're having to deal with it. So be honest with the right people about the kind of wave that you're on. You don't want to just broadcast to everybody at work, that you're dealing with a wave that has to do with, past, sexual abuse or something. You got to find the right people to be honest with. But we do need to be honest about the wave with the right people. Always remember that if damage occurred in your life as a result of a damaged relationship, then healing will always come and have to come through healthy relationships. And as scary as that is, it's just a fact. And so I encourage you to take a deep breath and try to embrace that, because if you've had a lot of damaged relationships in your life, the good news is that there are healthy people out there. And as you work with a therapist and begin to find ways to connect with reasonably healthy people, you're going to find just the kind of healing that you need, and it's going to happen through relationships. Another rule for safe surfing, watch the weather report and act accordingly, and so that has to do with, the weather that's blowing against you is going to tell you how much energy you need to put into surfing versus trying to focus on some other things. Unfortunately, we have to deal with the waves, and sometimes that means we have to put to the side some other desired activities in our life, because we really do need to cope and deal with the wave appropriately and effectively, and we just can't do it all. We can't do everything else too. We can't do everything on shore that we want to do when we have to first ride this wave successfully to shore, right? When you're not surfing, then that's the time to also deal with the issues of the ocean floor. as well, to make sure that you're dealing with them and not just reacting to them when the waves rise up. Okay? Remember this quote from Henry Ford. He said, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." If you tell yourself that you can't possibly ride this wave out or deal with it or stay on your surfboard, you will prove to yourself that you can't, and you will fall off, and you will struggle, and you will, come close to drowning maybe, and really, really deal with some major issues there. But if you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to get on my surfboard and I'm going to ride this out and I'm going to grab a hold of the things that represent my surfboard, then you will be able to do it, and you'll be able to do it with help. Like I said, healthy people and with God's help. Okay? So let's wrap up. Yeah, there's a lot there. There's so much we could continue with, but I want to read, where is it? I want to read a poem to you, or it's not a poem. This is a quote out of the back of the Alcoholics Anonymous book. They call it the Big Book, and this is part of one guy's story or testimony, whatever you want to call it. And it's about acceptance, right? And so acceptance is part of surfing, and I shared some of those thoughts earlier. This is page 449 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, at least the edition that I took this out of. He says, "Acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes." And so I encourage you to fill in the blank. He said, until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. What could you fill that blank in with? Until I could accept my blank. Until I can accept this situation. Until I can accept this thing lying on my ocean floor that I'd really rather not look at. But I realize now I have to accept that it's there. Until I accept the fact that this wind is blowing against me, could be somebody else's behavior, some other life circumstance, some other problem. Until I accept it, I can't work through it and be happy. And so he said, I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world, and I would just add, not just in the world, but specifically in other people. We make ourselves miserable and we fall off the surfboard all the time because we are trying to change and control other people. So thanks for listening. I want to invite you to Google something called the Serenity Prayer. Just type in the Serenity Prayer and it'll come up. Read it and use it. It's part of surfing. And so thanks for listening. Again, there's a lot going through my mind to keep adding new things, but I think this is good for today. And like I said, as with all my videos, and feel free to like and comment, but I especially invite you to share. Please share this video with someone that you love. And, like I said, I think everybody can get something out of it. And that's why I'm doing these videos. So God bless you and take care.